between colleagues. And I have Jude Kirton-Darling first.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much to the Commission. But my particular thanks go to the petitioners that we've heard this afternoon. These are petitions that I've supported since I was elected to the European Parliament. I fundamentally believe that if you are a Democrat, you see voting rights and political rights as fundamental human rights, and the idea that any individual citizen should be disenfranchised, which is effectively what we're seeing with British citizens who've been abroad for longer than 15 years, I find an affront to democracy and an affront to any notion of fundamental political rights. And I just say that at the start because I've taken this up directly with my own party. My party, the Labour Party, brought in the 15-year rule in the UK. The idea was that if you'd been abroad for longer than 15 years, then your connection to the UK was maybe less, that your connection in another member state may be more. That may well have been over the majority of political decisions, but when you see a situation where people have moved within the European Union using free movement and the rights that our membership of the European Union granted them, and have then seen their political rights undermined by the fact that there wasn't an acceptance in other member states that they could necessarily have a vote in national elections in other member states, then you actually have a generation of people who have lost their right to vote, lost that fundamental voice. And I think this House of democracy, has to take up those concerns. And when we leave, when me and my colleagues leave this House, I hope perhaps we'll be replaced by other British MEPs in the future, but when we leave this House, this problem won't go away, because it's not just Britain. There are 5 member states that disenfranchise their nationals, and there are petitions about potential petitions representing those people's democratic rights. So the question of free movement and political rights is a much broader question that goes beyond this. But I think the whole defence of the 15-year rule is thrown completely out of the water in the context of Brexit, because the people that Brexit hits the hardest, the most acutely, are those British nationals who've decided to make their lives in another European country, and nationals from other European countries who've decided to contribute and make their lives in the UK. And both groups of citizens were completely disregarded in the referendum in 2016. They have seen their lives turned upside down. Many are living in limbo. Many are very, very anxious about what happens. Anxious in terms of their social and their economic rights, their situation in the country in which they find themselves. And we as a Parliament have made citizens' rights our top priority. In position after position adopted in the plenary of this House, we have said that citizens' rights are our red line on a future Brexit deal. And yet the draft withdrawal agreement, which is being tabled between the UK and the EU 27, makes no reference at all to political rights, despite the fact that the UK is leaving the Treaty of the European Union, which does make reference to political rights. We have the right, as a result of our European citizenship, to vote in European elections, to vote in local elections, whether you live in another European country or a European national living in the UK. Those rights are now completely thrown in the air because of the draft withdrawal agreement, and the fact that there's been this doubling down on the idea that this is just a national competence, despite the fact that the Commission in the EU citizenship report after EU citizenship report, including last year's, says that this is a problem and that it needs to be resolved. So I would plead really with us to take this seriously. The clock is ticking. We know that the negotiations on Brexit are aiming to conclude in October this year. This is a very, very serious situation, and therefore I would really plead that we ask an oral question of the Commission in plenary about what happens in relation to political rights in the context of Brexit, taking these petitions as one part of the basis for that, but also we have had petitions from EU nationals in the UK which would allow us to have an oral question which covered both sets of citizens and then allowed us to address those concerns. There's legislation going through Westminster around the 15-year rule, a private member's bill which has the government's support. I hope that that legislation will see the 15-year rule scrapped in the UK, but as was said by Jackie, within that legislation there is no mention of referendum, and it's an increasing possibility, I would say, that there is momentum building in Britain as the lies of the Brexit campaign are revealed, as the reality of what a future deal with the EU looks like. There is increasing appetite from the public to have their say on the final deal, a people's vote on the final deal. The idea that the people who are the most affected by that vote, sorry, I'm quite emotional about it because these are many of my friends and family, the idea that those people, once again, won't get to say in the thing which affects their lives the most is really an affront to anybody who considers themselves to be a democrat. And therefore, we have to act, Cecilia. We can't just push this to one side. We can't just try and ask somebody else to take this forward. We as a committee, representing citizens in this situation across Europe, millions of people who find themselves in this situation, should speak up for them because we have some power. We have a voice. I think we should be writing to the UK government asking that this be included in the withdrawal agreement, asking that EU nationals in the UK be guaranteed their political rights. And we should be raising this in the plenary of the chamber of this House at all times 1 year out from the European elections. This is the time to say something on this, and we're the people who have to say it. Thank you.
Thank you, Jude. And I cannot think of anybody being more emotional and concrete at the same time. Yes, I can think of one, your grandmother, who made a fantastic statement just after the Brexit took place. I will never forget that when I saw her. And for those of you who haven't seen it, take a look because it's really something.